Hello, how are you?
Hi, good morning. You're doing well. The sun is shining.
Yeah, oh, yes. Everything getting greener, and this topic about ESG is getting hotter now. So we'd like you to go over some of the points today about what's actually going on in the US in terms of ESG and how we may prepare together with you, Cornerstone,
Sure.
in your future. So thank
Sure.
you. Let me have you share the slide.
Okay, thanks, Shen. So this morning's presentation is really for an audience who understands a fair amount about ESG already, and for the most part has had initiatives for tracking in place. So we're kind of picking it up from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So again, GHG metrics for a lot of sectors have been in place for upwards of 10 years for some companies. So a lot of people are saying, what's changed, right? So a couple things have changed. One is certainly the Biden administration goals, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And certainly we understand that administrations, can come and go every 4 years. But right now, for the next 4 years, this is definitely, they are on a path to really try to up the ante on this. Another substantial issue has to do with the OEMs. And this to me is as big, even though it's probably being compelled somewhat by the Biden administration, it really is a standalone issue. And that is that these OEMs for the very first time are transitioning from supplier requests to supplier requirements. And that is a significant, and some people say tectonic change. So ESG factors, as we all know, but more so now, more than ever, are really factoring into what corporate performance is for stakeholders. Gone are the days where this is only a reputational issue and the latitude of simply checking a box. The requirement of reductions is new. In fact, not even all the OEMs are there yet. We're hearing they're talking about it, but certainly there have been a few Japanese OEMs specifically that have just in the past few months gone from supplier requests, which have been going on for years, to a requirement. And that is a substantial change. The other thing that I think is a bit of a change is that most of these suppliers have been doing this the same way for a long time. And usually it's an employee or a few employees that are tracking that information and turning it into whoever at corporate or even at just the higher level plant employees and kind of go on with their day. And in order to really do this and do this right, it's going to be important that everybody take a hard look at the tracking that's been going on. And one of the things that we are encouraging, and we're not the only ones that are, is really following the ISO standard for greenhouse gas tracking and calculations. And they refer to principles that have been in place. And this is not terribly new, but people are seeming to pay more attention to it now more than ever. The first one, as we see here on the slide, is relevance. And that means to select the GHG sources, the data, the methodologies that are intended for the user of this information. So in that case, the OEM. Completeness, it probably goes without saying, but you need to make sure that you're including all the relevant emissions and validate those emissions. Consistency is really important, especially those that have more than one operation that's a like operation. You want to make sure that the data is meaningful and accurate so you can do comparisons.
Right.
Accuracy probably goes without saying. You need to verify that the data is precise and accurate for your planning and decision-making processes. And finally, and one that I think is highly significant, is this transparency. It's disclosing sufficient and appropriate information, but this is the biggie, to allow the intended user to derive equivalent results with the same information. That is a big, that's not a lot of words, but that is a big change in possibly how a lot of people have been doing this. So you've got to provide enough information, make sure it's accurate, relevant, complete, that if one of these OEMs were going to go back and pull that data, that they can drive the same results. So you really have to put that mindset in place.
Right.
One of the other things that is, I guess people are asking us, what kinds of questions should we be asking ourselves? Because again, we've got people in our operations that are doing this. And so we came up with, again, this is one of 100 questions, but some really biggie. How is each operation in the corporate structure handling their disclosures? Are the answers consistent from one operation to another? Is corporate actually acting as a clearinghouse for these questionnaires? Is anyone tracking the time commitment to manage these questionnaires, the sorting and reviewing of these questionnaires and answering those, which we call disclosures? The corporate ESG requests. How is the criteria defined? Meaning, what really do you want me to put in my carbon footprint? What is the methodology of that carbon footprint? And is it consistent between multiple plants? Is the baseline of the greenhouse gas and the waste and the water kept up to date when processes change? Is your tracking methodology consistent? And are the emission factors up to date? There's just so many questions that people have been doing this for so long. They're not really going back and really asking the hard questions to make sure things are done well. Finally, the benefits of a third-party evaluation. I mean, in my mind, the third-party evaluation is an environmental professional, right? This is what they do day in, day out. They know the questions to ask. They have the experience to quickly spot gaps in data, errors in factors or calculations, and best of all, find areas for improvement to save money and reduce the environmental impacts. That's a real quick overview, Shin, and I know you have some questions for me.
Oh, yeah. So what changes and are they really happening here on customer sites?
Yeah, I know. I've heard people say, what are the changes and are they really going to happen, right? I think people are...
Right.
Cornerstone's answer is simple. It's yes. The Biden administration certainly has laid out a plan for the U.S. to be carbon neutral by 2050. That includes some details of a carbon-free energy in electricity generation by 2035, which is a lot of goal. There's fuel economy standards that are accelerating the adoption of zero emissions, and Clean Cars for America, that's again part of the Biden administration goals, is to provide rebates for manufacturers to build or retool facilities to assemble zero-emission vehicles. So there could be some opportunities for these OEMs and also even for the tier ones. And there's an uptick in this ESG scoring. It's not just public companies anymore, it's also private companies as well. And it's clear that investors, all stakeholders, customers are interested, and they're basically saying it's no longer business as usual. One of your other questions is, am I sure?
Right.
I guess my answer is we're as sure as we can be based on what we know today, right? The majority of reliable indicators say yes, that ESG is here to stay. Government has put goals in place, no question. And most manufacturing sectors really have been continuing to rewrite their plans and to include carbon neutral. And the OEMs are moving, again, this biggie, supplier guidelines have been going on for 8-10 years to supplier requirements. And that is a significant change.
I see. And you guys serve for Fortune companies. And have you changed your company's mentality as a group, team, and thinking compared to before with all this?
Yeah, I'm gonna say yes and no, because the no part of that is for 30 years, our focus has been and continues to be assisting clients with compliance, right? And throughout all those years, we've encouraged sustainable management practices. We believe and always encourage the plan, do, check, act method, right? We believe the importance of the check component is conducting, at least periodically, having someone from a neutral third party conduct that check.
Right.
Those efforts have always included improving methods, reducing MUDA, identifying savings. But what's changed is for the first time, really, and some for just mere months, some in 2021, these OEMs are requiring these instead of providing guidelines. And the data around those requirements must incorporate these principles that we talked about a little bit earlier.
Right. Okay, that's a big deal. And OEMs, automotive, are starting to ask their tier one suppliers to report environmental data, right, through various cloud-based tools. One is called Manufacturer 2030, the Hive tools. And we hear manufacturers saying we have the EHS teams of professionals within their team that are covering this. But it is not like you just check a box and you're done with it. Right? How do you see the amount of work and advantage of using Apple's partner like Cornerstone to help?
Okay, good. That's a lot of questions. So let me kind of give you those in parts. Yes. First of all, regarding Manufacturer 2030, also known as M2030B, and a lot of people call it Beehive. This is one of a number of ESG tool providers, actually. These software tools are meeting a real need, quite frankly. These software, they're portals that are tracking energy, water, materials footprints with the goal of reducing that environmental impact. And the B component for the M2030, the B component is the data collection, the data review, the data dissemination, which is important, dashboards and more. And then the Hive part is a collaboration tool. It's for sharing best practices, which really in and of itself has a value to it. Tools are being designed to help the OEMs and the suppliers, and the time and expense involved with managing these ever increasing number of supplier questionnaires and requests. They grow. I mean, we truly are hearing they're growing by the week. These tools are a solution that should ultimately save the OEMs and the suppliers time and money, but it's going to be in the long run, right? Second part of your question is, what role can an environmental partner play, like Cornerstone? Our primary goal to date is working with clients, many of whom have tracked this data, as we talked about, for a long time. And more recently seen this uptick in ESG questionnaires. And some are asking only for carbon emissions, some are asking for water and waste, and some are asking for that detailed explanation, or at least a high-level explanation of the reduction efforts. The big driver, again, are these requirements for a specific reduction. And this means that before a tier one, tier two supplier looks into those efforts to reduce, you better make sure that this baseline data is accurate. For many suppliers, this means that the boards of directors have to look in the mirror, quite frankly, and they have to question the process, right? If it's been going on for 8 or 10 years and it's been doing the same thing, month in, month out, it's probably time to validate. So that's my thought on that.
And how do you validate the data by the suppliers and the companies?
Well, so suppliers are facing this firm reduction percentage, and for them, they've been using the same methods presumably for a long time, with little change. Before you report this data into one of these portals, we certainly absolutely say you better be darn sure that your data is accurate. So if we're involved, we're going to go to the source, right? We're already doing this as we speak. We've got people that specialize in this. We're evaluating, reviewing, validating the sources of the GHGs. What's been included in these calculations and what's not been included and why. We dig into the detail of waste tracking. What wastes are tracked? Is the definition of waste the same at each plant? And I will submit to you that we have found that that's not necessarily the case. Water tracking. What are some, only tracking, some people are only tracking their water bills, which means the only metric is the water usage. Is there a metering program?
Right.
Do we understand the processes with the highest greenhouse gas emissions or water usage? In addition, we take a very detailed look at those questionnaires. How many are you getting? From whom? What are they asking? How are your employees responding, right? How much time does the process take? And how do we streamline that process to ensure consistency in the information that's disclosed? Right. These reporting portals are a nice tool that should be helpful and save time, but the expectation is that you're going to get this tool, you're going to sign up for it, and that you're ready to input the data, right? And the data is good data. These software these software companies are not equipped or designed in their business, profile to help each individual location to say, hey, what have you done leading up to putting that data in, right? That's more of a environmental professional. And really what we're saying is that's the step before putting that information into the portal. Scrutinize that process before the data goes in. And this is an entirely different step.
Right.
And quite frankly, probably the most important before you start inputting that data.
Right.
I know
Okay.
the final part of your question was, I know you asked me about importing products from Japan in the car.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, at this point, unfortunately, the answers are not really consistent. Certainly, if the OEM is asking for the supplier to provide the greenhouse gas emissions,
Right.
just the production of the product, then you're in good shape. That's usually the first scope. There's no question. However, there seems to be a transition in play. And so some OEMs, they're asking about emissions associated with transport as well.
Right.
Cargo ship, the semi-truck, right? And at some point it becomes an even playing field. But soon it's not really necessarily going to be the choice of the supplier. That criteria and that scope will be defined by the OEM, which means that the suppliers are going to be judged equitably, right?
That's good. And so what, during the series of 1, 2, 3, what are we gonna talk about next in the next series?
I think in the next series, we're really gonna focus on these efforts based on some of our experiences of going into each individual supplier and kind of giving you an idea of in detail what that review looks like and that evaluation looks like.
Oh, that's great. Okay, good, good. Thank you. And thank you so much for your time today. And look forward to doing the next one real quickly.
Thank you for the opportunity. Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.